Please. Now, in 10 minutes, outside.
You're gonna get a video?
Sorry?
You got a video or it's
No, just together. Danish and Chinese people together. Okay? Great. I'm Lars. I'm from the main library in Copenhagen, and we do this every week. But not with Chinese, but we sing every week. That's why we're here. Great. You know this one? So you will be singing in Chinese and we will be singing in Danish at the same time. Okay? In 10 minutes. Just for fun. Just together, Danish and Chinese people. And because singing is a good thing. Okay? Yeah, exactly. We just practiced. So will you come with us now? And we will go and gather maybe a few more and then go outside and do it right now? Is that okay? Okay. Okay. I'm Lars. Okay, I'm Lars. And thank you. Tak, dejligt.
Den er faktisk også oversat til kinesisk. Ja, men forfatteren fik så genoversat den anden vej og sagde, det går ikke. Ja, men det er jo også noget med at få ordentligt til at passe. We just try. What text now?
to listen or making people understand. And then it's sitting like this.
Bedre at høre sig selv. Nummer 357.
Hvis på vejen så en bugt, ligger der et hus og smukt. Hvis på vejen så en bugt, ligger der et hus og smukt. Væggene er skæve små, ruderne er ganske små. Døren synker halvt klar, hunden kører det lille kvæg. Under taget svætter hvidrå, solen synger så videre.
morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please come closer, find a seat. We're just about to begin the Living is Giving Symposium. Please come closer, find a seat, and we will begin. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's really, really good to see all of you this morning, that we are so many of us assembled for the symposium. My name is Rasmus Jensen. I am one of the curators of the exhibition that we're sitting in, and I will be the moderator for the symposium this morning. An important practical note. The presentations, the talks up here, please come in, find a seat. The presentations up here today will be some of them in Chinese and some of them in English. So if you want a translation, or when you want a translation, pick up the headset at your seat. Channel 1 is Chinese and channel 2 is English. With that in place, it's my privilege to introduce Lord Mayor of Copenhagen, Frank Jensen, who will open the symposium and give us a speech of welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rasmus. Dear Vice Mayor Sui, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning, everybody. As Lord Mayor of Copenhagen, I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this beautiful venue and to the opening symposium as a part of Copenhagen Guest City exhibition here in the gas tank. Today, some of the finest experts from China and Denmark will explore how we can shape and design the cities for the future. By the end of this century, 10 billion people will live at our planet, with 8.5 billion living in cities. Globally, we face great ecological and social challenges such as climate change, migration, and social segregation. With strong political commitment, ambitious visions, and creativity, I'm sure we will overcome these challenges and create sustainable and livable cities in Denmark, in China, and in the rest of the world. Cities are hubs for economic and social power. They drive national and global development by concentrating skills, ideas, and resources in a single location. But rapid urban development comes as a heavy cost in terms of pollution, congestions, and decreasing livability. We must therefore change the way we design cities. Sustainability and livability must go hand in hand and be essential to the urban planning. But focusing on urban design and sustainability is not enough. We need a comprehensive and coordinated change in behavior. We need all levels to cooperate, invest at scale, share ideas and best practices, and plan for the long term, from the community to the global level. We need to work together, develop and implement solutions that work in everyday life. We face big challenges, but I'm sure that we will be able to solve them. The cooperation between cities like Beijing and Copenhagen is a very important step in doing so. Mayor Sui and I will make sure that our two cities make a very significant contribution to meet these challenges, because cities are key to the future. They drive of change. But we also need you, the companies and research institutions, to develop and test and implement the solutions of tomorrow. Looking ahead of today's program, program, I'm excited and optimistic. I'm certain that this symposium will draw international attention to technological and design-led urban innovation and lead to a better urban future for all of us. Let me end my speech this morning by thanking the Danish Industry Foundation and Realdania for making this event and this symposium possible. And of course, a warm thank to you, the Chinese and the Beijing city, and all the Chinese partners of our cooperation. I look forward to a great debate and inspiration on how to develop our cities and communities in the future. Thank you very much for coming this morning, and thank you for your attention. Xixi.
Thank you. Sustainability, livability must go hand in hand. We just heard from Lord Mayor Jensen. I think that's a fine phrase to start this symposium, where we will look exactly at this. How can we combine reaching for ambitious global goals with improving everyday life for the citizens of our cities? That's a big question, so we want to focus a little bit. Allow us to do that. We have asked three eminent Danish architects and social innovators, who we believe are some of the most inspiring changemakers out there. We have asked them to give us their ideas, their perspectives, the projects they are creating right now that can improve everyday life in our cities. We will have, during the symposium, 3 sessions. You'll also find a detailed program at your seat. The first session, how do we turn circular thinking into a cultural resource? Morgensang from Urbanization, Anders Lennager from Lennager Group will take a look at our shared resources, both in the sense of the traditions that we build our cities upon, but also the materials that we are building our cities with. How can we take better care of those resources in the future to create better cities? Next session, how do we inspire people to become actors of urban change? Wei Shannon Gluckman of Playable Design, Simon Pram from Game will discuss how can we create spaces for community, how can we give kids the opportunity to thrive, and how can we make everyone actors of positive change in the urban community. We'll have a short break, a little past 10:30. I'll give you all the practical information about that later. After the break, third session, how can we integrate nature into our cities, both as a tool to combat climate change, go against pollution, but also to create great green livable spaces that allow us to live a happy life, a thriving life as a community. You'll meet Stanley Long from Turnscape and Mette Skjold from SLA. After these 3 sessions, we are so privileged to have a mayor's session where Vice Mayor of Beijing, Mr. Sui, and Lord Mayor of Copenhagen, Frank Jensen, will share their perspectives on the presentations today, but also give us an idea of how cities as Beijing and Copenhagen can collaborate in pushing the sustainable agenda in the future. That's about it for the program. Before I introduce our first speaker, I would also like to thank 751 for allowing us to take over this amazing space that is, in my view, an excellent example of how we can actually reinvent or reinterpret the tradition, the cultural heritage in a modern city. And that's exactly what our first speaker is going to talk about. Mr. Morgensang is co-founder, principal design architect at the leading Chinese architecture firm Urbanization. Urbanization has gained international recognition for their works with urban renewal, urban regeneration, both here in Beijing and other Chinese cities. I believe your projects are both beautiful innovative, remarkable, and very much in tune with the everyday life. So we're really looking forward to hearing your take on how we can give tradition a new meaning in our cities as we move forward. Please, the floor is yours.
在这个大的格局下，都市实践试图在不断的衔接，那么城市包括。
Thank you. Let me just shift the first one for you, Anders. Thank you, Morgensang, for a fantastic tour of very few projects that, to us, shows really a deep understanding of what you call the socio-economic network of cities and how you can really use that in a positive way in regenerating cities. We'll have the opportunity, I'll ask you a few questions after Anders Linnager's presentation. A few words of welcome to you, Anders Linnager, CEO, founder of Linnager Group, who is, I believe I'm allowed to say, an unusual architecture firm. An architecture firm that is born into the circular economy. It means that at Linnager, they're not only designing the buildings, they're also designing the materials that goes into building the buildings so that you can control the entire ecological footprint of the whole process from nothing to a built project. It also creates an architecture that is, although it's brand new, it's coming from somewhere because all the materials have been harvested from reused old buildings around in Denmark. Anders, in a few years, you have been capable of transforming the idea of what sustainable architecture can be in Denmark. We are really happy that you are here with us today, and we're looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Imagine a world without resource scarcity, where our behavior doesn't have a negative impact on our climate, where waste does not exist, and where growth and sustainability are each other's prerequisites. Could that be real? Distinguished organizers and guests and mayors, thank you all for inviting me here. I'm really proud to be here. This is more an inspirational talk, my thoughts on this topic, rather than going through the many projects. So why? Let me start off, by giving you 3 facts. In a week from now, we will be housing 1.5 million more new people on the planet. In 1 week from now, 3 million people will have made their way into the new global middle class. 3 million more people will have completed their move in from rural district to an urban district. Houses, schools, shopping malls, and buildings. 60% of new urban areas has not yet been built and will need to be built until 2030. Even for ambitious architects as all of us here, that's really a handful. But we humans has become incredibly good at building big, fast, and cheap. And just think about China, now that we are here. From 2011 to 2013, the Chinese building industry has used just as much concrete as we have seen in the US through the 20th century. So what's the problem? Currently, more consumption, traffic, and building are equal to more waste and more climate change. And that's a major problem. But it doesn't have to be that way. Imagine if everyone was in the waste management industry. Designers, architects, resource brokers, company owners, investment bankers, and municipality workers. Imagine if we all started focusing on transporting a waste and demand problem into a solution-based, innovative... is it okay?
Yeah, it's a little unstable.
Innovative working on using waste as a resource that could be circulated not only once, twice, or maybe 10 times for a circular use. Essentially, this is what we want with circular economy, to change the rules of the game and kickstart a new paradigm, where we don't have to choose between growth or climate change. It's not a either or. And to be frank, that is the only chance we have to cater the growing population and demand, while at the same time reducing carbon emissions with 40 to 70%. For remember, that's necessary to keep temperature rises below 2 degrees Celsius. Thank you. Design for prosperity. Luxurious, high quality, handcrafted design made from scrap from your local landfill. It doesn't exactly sound like the traditional premium product description, does it? But yet, in a not too far distant future, that is exactly what it's going to be. One of the core goals of circular economy is to prevent waste generation and materials from ending up in the dump. In the future, we will not have any landfill. But first, we have to find new ways of making use of this immense amount of waste that we have generated and accumulated over the past centuries. And we must do so without compromising on aesthetics, quality, or price. A good example of this is our work, a high-end hotel that's running here in the back in Copenhagen Towers. The developers wanted a sustainable high-end product, and yet everything was thought of as built in normal materials. We succeeded in coming up with a new type of concrete, upcycled concrete made out of waste concrete. We came up with acoustic ceilings made out of PET bottles, the interior made out of waste wood from windows, old obsolete windows, and even made ventilation shafts out of carbon fiber cells from the America's Cup. The project won a design award, the Danish Design Award, but more importantly, we reduced CO2 immensely in this project, and we moved towards a solution not being ugly, not being expensive, and not being bad quality. To me, this shows at the end of the day, design is about changing the world for the better, that we can do two things at once: designing the world of tomorrow with the waste of today, and designing a new world entirely free from waste. The modern city is standing as proof of mankind's greatest achievement. It was built, renovated, and expanded when resources and labor were seen as infinite. A powerful demonstration of mankind's domestication from nature, and then again. When speaking of the great challenges of the world today, the city is at the core. Here we find 75% of all natural resource consumption, 50% of all global production of waste, and 60 to 80% of all greenhouse gases comes from the city. So change the rules of the game and start a new economic paradigm. I think that is obviously that we have to start with our cities. But the thing is, our cities is like our bodies. It is a metabolism. But unfortunately, we have been not very thoughtful about how we nourish the body. This is the main reason why urbanization is having such a negative effect on our climate. But it doesn't have to be that way. Urbanization and the built environment could play a crucial role in creating a sustainable world rather than being a contributor to the main problem. Our current system is not only destructive, it's also inefficient and it's irrational. While virgin materials has become scarce, the materials we have already extracted, used and thrown away have not disappeared. They are still here, they are accumulated and waited to be turned into new use in new cities and new buildings. So we must take their true value serious. It enables us to use local materials and to reactivate old constructions, districts, cultural artifacts in innovative ways, cutting CO2 emissions, protecting biodiversity, allowing cost reduction and creating local jobs. This is the circular city. So the role of business is buildings like this. A building where everything's made out of waste. Waste windows, waste concrete, waste wood. With an impact of reducing CO2 by 70 to 80%, only using waste as a resource. We are combining innovation, design and technology. We harness the extraordinary powers of business as a source of good in these projects. But we also see three types of businesses out there. There are those that are built with sustainability as their core DNA. There are those that try to understand and convert into a sustainable future. And then there are the businesses that we see too many of today, with stranded assets and no way to convert into a sustainable future. They will themselves become stranded. This also means that doing less bad and being a leader in the industry is not enough anymore. Only when sustainability becomes our core business, only when you see it to increase the value and give your clients and the users, only then you can make real change and gain a competitive change. In fact, the bigger impact for sustainability, the bigger business, and that's a new picture. The choice is yours. The last chapter here. We believe that the future of business will change the world for the better. We hope you will join us. And I know that many of you guys here are working around the clock to make this change a reality, because we need it. Open a newspaper any day of the week and you will see that the world needs this change. The starting point is to see global challenge not only as difficulties to overcome, but also as great potentials and opportunities. Believing that if we work relentlessly on finding solutions through innovations and cross-sector collaborations, we can transform problems into potentials for society, business, and for each and every one of us. So we hope that every morning you will wake up and look in the mirror yourself and make the conscious decisions to actually find the solutions so we can regenerate nature, collect water, clean the oceans, clean the air, harvest clean energy, eliminate food waste, and convert waste to resources. Give people a roof over their head, access to energy, and let them share and enjoy one another across generations, national borders, religion, and color. So allow me to end this presentation by asking you once again to imagine a world with no resource scarcity, a world where waste doesn't exist, a world where our behavior doesn't have a negative impact on our climate, a world where people, regardless of where we're born, are thriving. To me, that world is real. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. A world without waste, it is real, you've shown us. Please come up here, both of you. I'll ask a few questions. I'll start with you, Jan. In your work, you spoke about, or in your presentation, you spoke about the social economic networks of these tight-knit communities. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about how you collaborate with the community in creating those projects? Is it kind of an analysis you make, or are you out there speaking to people to understand the qualities, the fabric you're working with?
Mm-hmm. Very good question. I think in the research, I think it's important for architects to be on site, to be with the local communities, to be part of their everyday. We did a lot of investigations and asking questions, talking to the locals and how they feel. What we found out is that the kind of emotional ties to the site, to the cluster, to the community, has been very strong, even though the buildings were partially demolished and people who have been moved, let's say, outside of the city, even past the Fifth Ring Road, they come back. Typically, they come back on weekends. Just talk to their previous neighbors and look around the buildings. I think what we found out is this very strong emotional and communitize even when the buildings are non-exist.
Okay.
So we found that this is really a good resource for urban designers and architects to understand the complexity of the task. Not only just rebuild the physical and the spatial, but how to reconnect, to keep the kind of neighboring complexity and coexistence of different lifestyle and different people from everywhere in China.
Okay.
That's a great task. This is a difficult task.
Yeah. But still, it's also comforting to know that the social networks are maybe even stronger than the built infrastructure, the buildings in themselves. Yeah. Anders, let me ask you, speaking about social relations and connections and the qualities of the place, is there anything in working the way you do, working with circularity and reinvesting old materials in new buildings? Is it your experience that it also creates connections, interactions between people? Or is there a social dimension also to the circularity that you work with?
I mean, there surely are. What we can see is that in our projects, the kind of the social sustainability strives in actually three different ways. One is actually when we are doing these materials, we can reactivate a lot of social jobs to kind of work with these materials and convert them into the new products that we build the buildings with. So that's one way of activating something socially. Another thing is that we also really see that the people have a certain understanding about the materials and the narratives. All of a sudden it sells the projects with an understanding of a narrative that we are doing something good by investing in a new house or buying a new furniture, that has a narrative that they can relate to and interact with that. And another social circular level, there are so many things about both the shared economy, about how we use the resources, not only materials, but also how we interact with each other in an urban context that is quite differently. And we can see that harnessed a different type of architecture that relates to the public use of our projects in a new way.
Okay. And to you, you didn't address the specific subject of recycling materials and resources. Is that anything that you work with in your projects, or how do you see the future of this way of working that we're presented with here?
I think it's a very important aspect of reusing existing materials, sustainable materials, like the composite bamboo that we have been using to in the kind of a traditional neighborhood. I think one of the ideas that it's sustainable, reusable, at the same time it's light. So if anything goes wrong, it's an experiment. If anything goes wrong, we can easily take it out and do it somewhere else, instead of have a very permanent concrete steel construction. So that's also, I think, it's important when you work with the traditional neighborhood. There's always an experiment. There's something that you're not sure. So I think by choosing material, the right material, is absolutely important for us.
Okay. To round up, and we could keep talking for hours. Could you just give me one idea, each of you? One suggestion. Moving forward, creating more sustainable, more livable cities with respect to your individual focus. One important thing to do, maybe a little differently going forward if we want to make a difference. And now I'm talking us as designers, architects, but also as politicians and business leaders. One thing that we should do a little differently in the future.
Well, I think I probably said many things in this focus, but I think one of the most important things is that we have to understand that the value change has changed a lot. What we do as politicians, as architects, or whatever we do, we don't have to change what we're doing, but the relationship and partnerships that we are creating has to be different. Because to use an obsolete word as disruption, every business, municipality, or field of operation needs to be disrupted with a different way of thinking about how the value change can create that more value from where I'm sitting as a politician or urban developer. And that's super important.
So new partnerships. If you look in the program, in the back of it, in the break or afterwards, you can see there's a series of quotes from different experts commenting on what we need to do to promote sustainable behavior change. One of those quotes is, first, we need to gather everyone around the table, and then we need to redesign the table. Just adding to your comment. Jan, what's your one suggestion to things we should maybe do a little differently?
I think at this time we need to learn how to share. While China has been a collective society in the past, many years, but now we are entering a stage of individualism, consumerism. We consume too much and we take too much space. At the time, I think we need to learn how to restrict our desires, but to share with others. This is also the reason we look at the old part of the city, where it's very dense, very small neighborhoods and courtyards and small housing, but you can live a pretty decent life if the modern amenities can be implemented in that area. But you don't have to take the entire courtyard. You can take 1/4 of the courtyard, but you can live a pretty good living. And then you share your courtyard, your hutongs, your neighbors, little squares with all the others. I think this is the kind of conceptual way to relook at the city. What can be reused and reactivated instead of inventing everything new. That's my suggestion.
What a beautiful perspective to end this talk. Thank you to both of you.
Great presentation.
We need to learn to share. I think that's not just something you could say about China, but also Denmark and everywhere else in the world. Thank you for two great presentations. The first session was about our city, our buildings. Now we will zoom in a little bit and look at the people, us. The question we want to ask with our two next presentations is, how do we inspire people to become actors of urban change? First presenter will be Weiwei Shannon Gluckman, who is founder of the People's Architecture Foundation and Playable Design, where you have worked with Lego, reaching out to, I think, literally hundreds of thousands of children and families in China.
Yes.
Inspiring them to work with Lego as a way of building their dreams, their futures, their visions. I believe you're going to talk about how we can give kids an opportunity to thrive, but maybe also how we can learn from next generation and give them the tools to change our perspectives of what a city can be.
Yes.
We're happy to have you here.
Thank you so much.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi. Hi. Welcome to Beijing. 谢谢大家。我今天会用中文跟大家沟通，因为我被邀请是。
Thank you, Weiwei, for introducing us to the new human. I'm not one of them, but I want to live in a city like that. Amazing, thanks. Our next our next speaker, I want to say, on stage, is Simon Pram, who is coming in right here. And Simon, you have dressed for the occasion. Because Simon, he is the founder and the CEO of the non-profit Game, who works with street sports as a way of empowering youth. So you have created quite amazing centers for street sports in Copenhagen and other Danish cities, but you have relocated to Beirut, where you're actually working with kids who have maybe even more need for a free space and finding it in sports than is the case in Denmark. You'll speak to us about how we can give community a space to unfold. We're looking forward to that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. It's great getting the honor to be here and present. Really, I'm not the one doing the work, but you have a chance to meet the real people doing the work, because we have two of our volunteers, Rotvan from Copenhagen and Marianne from Copenhagen, and they will be doing sports with the mayors and the Crown Prince tomorrow and in the following days. So please stop by and say hi to them and try our small test. So I'm dressed like this because I take sports and play very seriously. I was just told to. So let's see if we can get the right slide.
Should be the green one, Simon. The green arrow pointing forward.
There we go.
Just a couple of next. Yes.
Great. So give community a space to unfold. I love this picture because it has great sports facilities, and I love doing sports. I do it as much as I can. I also like this picture because it makes my heart beat faster because of the inequality that we can see. This picture is from Sao Paulo. We're not doing anything there, but I haven't found a better picture to illustrate what we are about and why we're doing what we're doing. Because besides the wonderful sports courts, it also has a wall. And I know you have a great wall in China, but this is not a great wall because this wall is keeping a lot of children from playing sports. So we have the rich children on the right playing sports, and then we have the rest on the other side, maybe looking over to play, but having no chance because of the physical wall separating them from doing sports. And sometimes the wall is physical, but the wall can also be cultural, where we see some places girls are not allowed to play sports. It can also be financial, as we see some places, even in Denmark, where you pay sometimes as much as $1,000 for a club membership per year. We see it in Cairo. You pay as much as $10,000 sometimes for a membership of one of the former British gentlemen clubs. So the wall can be made up of many things. Sometimes it's even made up of skills. Skills, how can that be a wall? Well, we see sometimes that kids start playing football when they're 4 years old, and then if your name is Mohammed and you find out 12 years old, I want to play football, and you come down in the club, then there's no room for you because the others are much better. So I'm going to show you what you can do about that. But first, I want to show you this picture. We already heard about what the technical and digital devices are doing to children. This is more like a PlayStation situation where you're sitting at home, spending more and more time in front of a screen. On average, Danish children spend 3.5 hours a day in front of a screen. That's a shame. Do you know how much sports they should be doing? According to the WHO, they should be doing 60 minutes of sports every day, 7 times a week. For adults, it's a little less. Don't worry, don't get stressed. You don't have to do 60 minutes today, but 30 minutes 5 times a week. That's what's recommended for adults. So this is a problem because of physical inactivity. It's also a problem because when we're online and on social media, we tend to interact mostly with the ones who look like ourselves. And that creates a segregated community that we also heard about earlier today. And, you know, how do we interact with the others? How do we create an inclusive society? That can be a challenge. So, European adolescents who are still supposed to do 60 minutes a day, they are not active enough. So only 2 out of 10 are physically active enough. But don't worry, China. It's not as bad in China, because if we look at China, I think we skipped one, sorry. Yeah. It's a fast one. I like it, it's fast. If you look at China, you have actually an eye for this challenge. So in China and Southeast Asia, it seems to be going the right direction. So physical inactivity is dropping, which means more people are becoming physically active because you have decided we need to do something about this. So this is great. And this is in particular because of China that Southeast and East Asia is changing for the better. But if we look to the future, then troubles are coming. Because as you become even more developed as an economy and the domestic physical activity is reducing due to washing machines and technical assistance, and you also spend more and more time in offices instead of being out in the field, then you are heading for the same trouble that we are in the Western world. So please take it seriously. Yes, it's going the right direction, but it can quickly shift if you don't have an eye for it. So this is why we have to use more sports, not only because of physical activity, but also because of friendship, the friendships that we can build through sports. Because when we play sports, everyone is equal. So when you're on the football court or when you're on the basketball court and you hit a three-pointer, it's 3 points. No matter whether you're born in Copenhagen, in Beijing, or in Somaliland, it's 3 points. And you build friendship, you sweat together, you make friends. What I would recommend that you do, and I know in China you are fantastic at organizing the whole infrastructure with the power grid, water, everything. But also keep in mind that you have to do the same thing when you design your cities in terms of parks. Because we know that children and elderly people will not go to the parks if it's more than 15 minutes away walking. So make sure that when you design your cities, that you also put in parks. Nice, they don't have to be big every time, but make parks where you can play sports, there's a playground, you can hang out, you can socialize. Because that's what's gonna make people use it, not only because of the stadiums, this is for the elite. The young people are not gonna use them. You know, make the small parks. In Copenhagen, there's a wonderful initiative called pocket parks, where you make small parks close to where people live. I love this example. This is my kids' former school. Now we live in Beirut, but they used to go here. And I think this is a wonderful example of an integrated urbanism, where you create a facility where you can play sports that also serves for the public school as the schoolyard in the daytime, but also as just a public square for anyone who lives in the area in the weekends and afternoons. So think about urban integration. One place can have several purposes, and then you can make many more of them. So many schools have a fence around it. This does not have a fence, and people still respect it and take good care of it. So I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you about these two guys. It's Kuram and Samir, and they are two sons of immigrant workers who came to Denmark in the 1960s. So Kuram and Samir, they helped us develop great urban space in Copenhagen. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is because you have to involve the youth if you want to make spaces that really creates value. So what Kuram and Samir did is that they came to Game and said, you know, we need a place to play in the winter time, because in Denmark it's too cold to play outside in the winter. So they were looking for a place where they could play indoor. And we helped them and said, you know, write a letter, and then we can take that letter to the mayor. So they wrote this letter. It was the first official letter, so they forgot to sign it. And then we told them, hey, you have to sign it. And then Kuram came by and he wrote Kuram and Samir. So signed for both. And then that was okay. And then we took it to the mayor. And luckily, the former mayor was just as open-minded as Frank Jensen. So she decided, okay, this is a great idea. Let's see what we can do. Their dream was to get 1,000 square meters for indoor sports. And what they got was 2,240 square meters, more than they ever dreamed of, with indoor asphalt. So it's just as accessible as the street outside. Anyone can come. You don't need to have fancy shoes. You can just come and play. And it even won a prize. And the reason why I put this is, of course, to brag a little bit, but it's also because at the announcement, Beijing also won a prize for the Bird's Nest, your fantastic Olympic stadium. This cannot compare, but they gave it a special prize because it's bringing the community together. So, that is all I brought for you today. All I want to say is, chiche.
Thank you, Simon and Wei Wei. Please come up here again for a few questions. I want to start by asking you the same question, which is, you said, Simon, it's not just a question of designing spaces for the kids. You need to design with them. Wei Wei, can you give us an idea? Also, I'd like to ask the same question to you, Simon. But how do you design, or how do you work with this generation? What is any keys to getting a successful collaboration in designing new ideas, new projects?
Well, I think the notion to think of kids as kids needs to change. That's why I call them the new human, because I believe they're our future. We as adults get older and older. We have experiences, but we have no way of understanding or how to engage the future. So for us to be more lively and have a key to the future is only way to access through children. And the way to interact with them is to play. So for me, it's a dual learning relationship. I don't believe teaching and learning is a single one-way relationship, especially playing. I learn a lot from my children. Yeah. I do what I do because of my children, because the conflict they have, because the difficulty that they have, and then they inspire me every day, because only young children, I'm sure you guys have children, you know it. It doesn't matter what kind of difficulty they arrive or they encounter, they will always to embrace it with happiness. And then the next day they will always get up, and then they don't have this negative emotions. They always want to go forward. Yeah. And then what we call that is falling forward. And I think as adults, what we need to do is learn from them, not just view them as ours, but view them as a key.
Yeah. So that's one of the keys, not seeing kids as kids, but as new humans in a mutual relationship of learning. Thanks. Simon, your thoughts?
Well, I think in game we're not that good at engaging children in the design. I think you're much better at that, so maybe you could teach us how to do that. We find when we ask children how they want to design things, they often talk about what they have already and what they know. So what we do a lot is work with youth, so 15, 25-year-olds, and they have a lot of creative ideas. Right. And then what we get from it, we get, good ideas, and then we get ownership. Because the young people take ownership when they have been involved in the process. Kuram and Samir, we have no graffiti at the place. We have no, broken windows or anything, because the young people feel that it's their place, because they were part of establishing it. So that's another good reason for involving the youth.
Okay, thanks. One last question. In your work in Lego and in building these street sports centers, could you give me an example of a great idea, a great solution, something that you wouldn't have come up with, but they did? Simon, maybe you first?
The first one that comes to mind is we did all these workshops. We've done many of these facilities, and we asked them, how do you want it? How big should the court be? The height of the goals. But what the young people often talk about, and especially in this case, is the corners. What's going to be taking place in the corners? Then you can have a soda in the corner, or you can sit and chat or update your Facebook. So the corners became a central idea, and it's really translated into places for socializing.
Thanks. Good example. Wei?
Yeah, I think everything they do is more about their thoughts and the way that they express. I think playing for children is a way of expressing, not just in showing ideas, because I think only adults think ideas as ideas. Children think as just a way to expressing their inner voice. So for me, it's for them to able to think with their hands and without really as conceptualizing an idea, but they can tell you stories through amazing ways. And it's kind of like what they're mentioning about sharing. As long as they can express their inner voice And I think that's the beginning of a birth of idea. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, both of you. Let's build a city with your new humans. Thank you. We'll be back here and begin again in 20 minutes. That's 5 to 11. We'll start again. I hope you have enjoyed the morning session. After the break, it will be a discussion about nature in the cities and the mayor's session. We're looking forward to see you again in 20 minutes. Thank you. This morning, we've been discussing cities. We've looked a little bit at the new humans who live in the cities. Both humans and cities depend on nature. Our third session today will be a discussion of how we can work with nature in our cities, both as a tool to combat climate change, pollution, but also as a way of creating a more livable spaces, a better city with nature present around us. On stage, in a minute, it's my pleasure to introduce Stanley Lung, who is director, leader of the international department at Turnscape. Turnscape is, fair to say, a world-leading pioneer within designing cities that work a little more like ecosystems. You've been working with the nature of our cities for 20 years. You yourself has also been working a couple of years, Stanley, in Copenhagen, with Bjarke Ingels, at Big. We're looking forward to your presentation that will be about how we can give nature a place at the heart of our cities. Welcome, Stanley.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I will be speaking in English. It's going to be fast and a lot to share to everyone. So hopefully I want to have 8 different principles or 9 different principles that you can take back and rethinking about how we should design city in the future. So Turnscape, our topic was given, it's giving nature a place at the heart of the city. And the basic idea about our company name, it's Tu and Ren. It's basically finding the relationship between man and nature together and finding the harmony. So our founder, our president, Dr. Kong Jin-yu, he found the company, and we have about 600 staff in total. We are a very design-based office. This is all our young and talents energizing group that changing cities. We have been in the business for almost 20 years and built 600 projects and built about 250 cities. Total, we still have a lot of projects which is under construction, about 3,000 projects that is going on. Awards happening all the time. So we are contributing as Chinese designer in the international stage. So we are very humble with this recognition. So back to the topic would be urbanization and how climate changes and how we should design city in the future. Urbanization, expansion, big mega metropolitan region, it's happening in China all the time. We are messing up with our landscape, our land. We have a big transformation from rural to urban. We have done a lot of massive change. We turned something which was productive in terms of landscape and become many of them which is what we call maybe not necessary, which require a lot of maintenance and care with our landscape and our parks. So we start to realize, we start widening our roads, but then we still haven't solved any problems in terms of traffic. The distribution is uneven. And then we also try to fight with nature at the same time. We have all these biggest dam in the world, bigger water treatment system, and trying to fight against with nature. And of course, we didn't succeed. And then in terms of agriculture, we always think that it's actually good for the environment, but actually we are actually making the environment even worse. So we have built a lot of these kind of great infrastructure and then we cut off the natural environment and the nutrition of how the ecosystem works. So we are facing a lot of big challenges. So flood, drought, pollution, habitat loss, 50% of our wetland in China are disappearing in the past 50 years, and even more nowadays. So this is a brownfield China right now. I have done probably accurate study from Google Earth, see how our nation changed from 1979 to currently nowadays. We see how urbanization has started to taking over our land. And how we could solve the problem. I think we need a big revolution in general. So that's our goal and vision for our company as well. We should value the complete ecosystem, finding the symbiotic kind of relationship between man and nature. We talk about sponge philosophy, what we call nowadays 海绵城市. So how do we work with water? How do we work with nature? We took a very different approach to design our project and cities. We call it the negative approach, or basically putting nature as the highest priority and do our design and set up our great infrastructure. And then a big aesthetic that we want to convey would be our Bigfoot rustic aesthetic, natural environment, natural, rural kind of rustic experience in the city. So we talk about different scale. Hope you can cope with us. First would be the national security pattern. How do we design and make a blueprint for the nation in the future? We start off with very scientific approach, understanding how different systems are working, the ravine system, water system, topography, biodiversity, topography, everything, before we know how the nation should expand, also cultural heritage as well. Second, we have done a study for Beijing as well. It's how is it possible that we can bring in nature into the city center, and how the city should expand in the near future as well. How many resources that we have and capable to accommodate either more population or fewer population. So this is just one of the scenarios that could fit 40 million people. And this is kind of maintaining the current population size, about 25 million people. And the ideal scenario, which is cutting off half of the population from Beijing. So we thought that maybe this study from Turinscape and Peking University have started to direct some of these decision-making of having the Tongzhou CBD and sub-district, and giving more space for nature within the city. And then some of the built project that we have, this is a project in Wuhan. We are setting up, usually we see road system, but now we have a green infrastructure system putting water as the highest priority of how we can reconfigure and design our city. So this part of the construction, it's under construction right now. A big portion of it, it's developing. Some of the water has been cleansed. And then start to give a better environment during the overall construction as well. So this is Guangzhou. We study the whole Guangzhou territory of how we can implement Sponge City into the heart of different areas. So this is some of the construction photos, and then we can see how nature can actually make a big impact in just a short period of time. So this is a project in Haikou. We call it 城市双修, so dual recovering the environment and also recovering the city at the same time. So there's the night view. This is how we can make minimal impact to the environment. So the last section of the presentation, it's down to small scale, what we call the rustic Bigfoot aesthetic. So I want to leave with 8 different principles. The first one would be make friends with flood, 与洪为友, changing gray infrastructure into green infrastructure. And this is what happened before, big embankment, concrete embankment. we demolish it and transform it into a usable space where people can interact and have an intimate relationship with nature. We also study why it has to be scientific, because there will be flood coming in. And then this is what happened during the flood season. We can't compete with nature. We have to work with them. So this is what happened during the dry season. And kids are coming in, and they will find their own ways to play around. And then our projects, and find different places. And then minimal touch, we are very careful about what material we want to use. All should be penetratable to the ground and permeable kind of materials. Second principle would be go productive, 丰产的景观. So low maintenance, low cost as well. This is what happened before. There is a project in Zhejiang province, Quzhou. And then we turn it into our farmland at the same time. So this is what happened. Again, it's an abundant kind of natural crop rotation, very low cost, very low maintenance. People can participate. They will just hang out and come and take photos. Curation, different activities can happen in here. Then there's different festival coming in. Kids are coming in as well. And then another important, it's the green sponge. So it's resilience at the same time. There's also a project in Harbin, in the heart of a new district called Chunli. There's where all the kind of development are happening around the city. It was a dry out wetland. We recover it in 2-3 years. So we have to understand actually nature is very powerful by itself. We just need to let them work and give them space. So you can see how the skyline was transforming in only just 2 years. And then kids are coming in. You have to build like a park for the community as well, even though the surrounding is very high density. Another one would be creating a living system using vegetation to clean different pollutants and contamination. This is a project in Shanghai. It's the expo park near it's next to Wangpujiang. This Wangpujiang, and then we pump in the water. We use different plants and vegetation, and then we clean it. So this slow process from a grade 5 water to a grade 2, grade 3 water, which the whole expo site right now are using for irrigation and watering the plants. So this during the construction, after the construction, people start to take over this place, and then different type of biodiversity take place. Another thing is let nature do their own work. 让自然做工. There's a park site in Tianjin. It's an industrial site. In 2-3 years, we transform it into a very nice environment. So a lot of different depths of cut and fill ponds, constructed wetland where different biodiversity and habitats can occupy in this one single space. So different seasons also have different experience as well. And then working with the community. So, the sixth principle, minimal intervention. How do we make the lowest impact to the site? There's a project in Qinhuangdao. We just designed this 21-hectare site with a single bench and a boardwalk. It's a 500-meter long fiberglass furniture. We don't even have any signage, so we reduce the cost of signage, lighting incorporating within it, so everything is integrated. We have another project that has similar kind of impact, and then we transform the natural and the backyard alley, which is a very polluted river, into a very pleasant place. Value the ordinary, understand the memories of the site. There is a project in Zhongshan. Shipping industry are big. We kept all the structure. We reconstructed some of these memorable train tracks. And then people are using it for different purposes nowadays. And then last one would be integrative kind of eco-solution. Not just a single portion of the park, but actually we're thinking about how the city should transform in the future at the same time. So we have to provide good environment and also a habitable space for nature, as well as people can interact within this environment in a very enjoyable and relaxed leisure kind of way. And the final last thing is how we could move forward to the future. We incorporate into our practice. Our company set up our own academy. So we set up academy within small villages and try to educate and have workshop and exchange with different professional designer and also different industry at the same time. So we start to reconstruct and helping the rural kind of environment. And I want to leave one last tagline to everyone would be from Lao Tzu. Nature does not hurry, yet everything accomplished. In China, designing ecology, it's not about just making beautiful environment. It's about our survival, how we can move forward towards the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stanley. I want to live in a city that looks like that. I want to make friends with the floods.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker, CEO and partner in SLA, Mette Skjold. SLA is, I believe, it's fair to say, one of the treasures of Danish architecture. When you move through a space, an urban space designed by SLA, you'll get a feeling of nature, of city nature. But probably everything around you is also carefully designed to deal with water, to deal with pollution or cooling down the place. Mette, I'm looking forward to hearing about this, how we can design cities, greener cities for future generations. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the hands of Stig L. Andersen, our founder and a professor in aesthetic urban design, giving the magic of limestone as a natural matter to you today. At SLA, we work with connecting people with nature in cities. We call it nature-based design, where our knowledge on the capacities of nature forms the basis of our design. Our hallmark is ecosystem services. Nature-based design is not something like an amenity or just nice to have. It is something that can perform better cities for us. It can clean the air, it can filter the noise, and it can retain water, just to mention a few examples. And immense research has proven us that we as humans thrive in the proximity of nature. Is this not very loud, or is it all clear? Good. Okay. Yet, the impacts of climate change are all over us, aspiring fear when will the next disaster hit us, when will fear of chaos, and when will the next drought, heavy rain or storm hit our neighborhood. Nature-based design is all about joy. It's on the contrary. The joy of celebrating when rain comes to our cities, the smell it brings, the sounds, the reflections. At SLA, we are a multidisciplinary team. A lot of us are nerds on the values and ecosystem services of nature. And nerds is great business. It only requires a couple of generalists as myself. We are generally interested in the life cycle of our materials, going from plants and trees to paving and lighting. And we conduct research with plant nurseries that grow trees in natural condition. This, as an extra benefit, enhances the livability, the longevity of the trees when they are put out in our cities, but also increase the biodiversity. Down here in your right corner, you see partner Rasmus Astrup collecting and measuring Nordic slate tiles directly at the quarry. When you produce a normal slate tile, in a Cartesian grid, There's waste of up to 50% from the clean cut, the first breakage, to the standard tile. Taking advantage of this knowledge on the life cycle of Nordic slate, you can actually minimize the waste from 50% to only 5%. Values like this of only 5% waste and a considerable lower CO2 footprint is values that are important to market leader Novo Nordisk at their global headquarters in Copenhagen. There are 2 entrances to the site, and as you can see, we stuffed in a majority of green. This was a former parking lot and production area. And here you see the raw cut, only 5% waste, Nordic slate. And yes, the paving plan did take extra hours to conduct, and it was an honor to do it. I have brought a sample of a raw cut Nordic slate. It has an almost oily surface. It has fossils in it, and you can sense the layering, and you can also sense the shape of a raw cut. You can pass it around. The other entrance is of bright green concrete. The Danish philosopher Kierkegaard is famous for having said that he walked his way to all his big ideas and thoughts. He also walked away from all his illnesses. We placed trees and plants in the center of the paths, making them detour into the park, so not being lean, as a production facility often is. Going slightly up and down, encouraging people to be present and sense the nature. The bright surface reflects light, both daylight and artificial light, so it's energy consumption smart. By including a timer on the electricity, the light, the artificial light, you can actually, according to daylight and the amount of daylight over season, you can actually lower energy consumption on electricity up to 40%. Like when the moon is out or when there's snow in our cities, it reflects light. In 2011, Copenhagen was hit by a 1,000-year rain event. It paralyzed the city for several days. And the cost of renovation and getting the city back to normal function was accumulated to up to above $1 billion US dollars. This made the city think. I think, Frank, you can recognize that. And conduct a resiliency plan for the future of Copenhagen. The plan concluded in 300 projects and an investment of 1.5 billion US dollars over 20 years' time in Copenhagen. So then the city peers asked again, how can this investment and 300 projects bring more value to our citizens? And they asked us to conduct a think tank for the city peers and for a great team of blue-green infrastructure expert fronted by the city architect, where we had the thesis of working with climate adaptation in the city, the 300 projects, and how could we connect this with city nature. As you see the orange ring, that is the hardcore environmental values of the Copenhagen model. This is a model for assessing ecosystem services in Copenhagen, going from rainwater management to CO2 reduction. And the brown circle in the middle is the social values. And we measure that by biodiversity, but we equally have the social values and the environmental values for the future of Copenhagen. It is all concluded in a catalog. I have 5 hard copies with me from Copenhagen. You are more than welcome to come up and get one afterwards. Yes. Yeah, and of course quality of life is in the center of it all. The soul of Nørrebro takes this equation between the social and the environmental values and by nature-based design into physical design in the city center of Copenhagen. The program of water for this project is equivalent to 7 Olympic swimming pools, 20,000 cubic meters of water. It is also in the inner city of Copenhagen that is a very dense neighborhood where the square meters of recreational space per capita is below WHO's recommendations. So there's a high demand for high quality recreational space while dealing with this rainwater amount. And this is our project for that, where we connect that and reprogram the site. We have included the schoolyards into the design of the park, learning the children about nature, and imagine that you can actually have a math lesson outside in a park. That would be wonderful, reconnecting our school children, our future generations with nature. Okay, now I don't have any more slides. I had slides of a bug hotel. Last year we made a bug hotel made of clay, brick and wood, inhabited by many different species of insects and bugs, where you have children learning and understanding what nature is all about. 1st of August this year was Global Overshoot Day. So from 1st of August this year, we've been brutally taking from the nature's reserves. In Denmark, the national overshoot days was the 28th of March. In China, it was the 15th of June. So I strongly invite you all to work together, to collaborate with nature-based design in our cities, since that is where we are all moving to cities. Our children are the first generation to live their entire lives in cities. We must bring forward the wonders and beauty of nature to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mette, and we're so sorry that the last slides were missing.
I had bees of, full pollen pants. I had bug hotels. That was like when we had to go, but I'll come back. I'll show you another time.
Strangely enough, it was the slides with all the people in them.
It truly was. Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you just a few questions. I want to start over with you, Stanley. You showed some really big pictures of China and the globe. When you do projects like you do, grand projects, introducing an ecosystem mindset into cities, there must be some kind of barriers and structures to deal with. I mean, ways of doing things, who owns the lands, and so forth. What does it take to work this way? I mean, it must be rather complicated to get from idea to finalized project.
Well, I think that we work with city decision makers all the time, and I think all the city mayors, politician officials, they understand the value of this nature-based design and how we work with these different environmental or geological parameters. I think for us as a profession, this is not the most difficult part. We can always do design, but it's always the mindset from the top down, and also in a way it's the reverse kind of bottoms up kind of encouragement, that wanting to have the willingness to make a change within the city, what the city citizen, they felt like they are part of this and own part of this city and feel proud of it. So I think the biggest challenge is not the framework or the design, it's actually the mindset of top-down and designer perspective, how we can collaborate with all the experts, different disciplines, I believe is the new design kind of era. It's about mixed disciplinary, cross-disciplinary in the future, instead of only just a single mindset from behind.
Mette, one of the, if you look at the really big picture, one of the issues we're dealing with that we're also addressing in the program is the loss of biodiversity globally. That we are in the middle of a sixth extinction of species. Is that something we can deal with in incorporating nature? Does it make a difference to the global problem of biodiversity? I know you're also somehow dealing with that in your projects.
Yeah, I think it's crucial that we are more focused on the two of the 17 sustainable goals, development goals, where it's about life on land and life in water. And I know that in Denmark we are not performing really good on that. 2 weeks ago I had the mayor of Biodiversity visiting our office from Paris. And she told me, she's a former activist, Greenpeace activist. I don't know why it come from there, but she was a super nice lady, pointed directly from Hidalgo. And she said that biodiversity plans of Paris the goals need to be met before you talk about economy and prosperity and transformation. I really think that we should both on a bottom-up but also top-down level begin to discuss biodiversity in cities much more. We have for so many years taken nature out of the city, and I'm not referring to having wild nature in city, but to understand the capacities of nature and transform that into a new type of design, a new way of living that enhances biodiversity.
Okay. You've both showed us some beautiful and great example of new natural urban spaces. If you look at, let's say, 10 years forward, look a little bit into the future. Where, in new ways, do we have integrated nature in our cities around us if we make it successfully? Stanley, how does the city look like if it's up to you and the other 500 guys at Turnscape?
I think back to some of the core question, it's the urbanization. Next generation, future generation, they are all living in the cities. So they stop living in the rural district or the villages. So that's why we always think about, can we bring back some of the kind of essence of our daily life? We talk about slow life, slow city nowadays. So we want to create this kind of experience, the natural kind of landscape. We can touch the water, we can play with animals, sheep, goats, and all this. And I think this is an informal type of environment, but also very constructed and designed, where people will be working, playing, living within nature at the same time. So it should be wild type of landscape, but in some ways, some of them should be well constructed and directed by different designers.
If I should follow up on what Stanley so nicely says, is when we, for example, design a plant area where we only have nature-based design, we have like a long list of indigenous species. I should have showed you some of the finest examples we have in Copenhagen at the moment. And then we revisit the site after a year. We revisit our sites all the time, because actually after handing our projects over to the client, that is where the life of our project starts. How people move, how they behave, how they do things differently, how you can nudge something that you didn't know that you actually were nudging by the design. And the same goes with the biodiversity and the plants. Some of the plants that we plant die. But very often, a lot of different species are detected after just a few months. So I think not only as a performance and capacities you can get inspired by nature, but by the whole process of how nature is actually adjusting to the local climate, to behavior, to use, to to the context, to the soil. We can inspire a way of designing our cities in the future. At least that is what we do at SLA, and I think you do the same.
Somehow people disappeared from the presentation. But could you, to round up this debate, give me an example from one of your projects of how they've had an effect on people, how people have started meeting in a new way, or starting doing things differently, having new experiences in the neighborhood? Just some example that have touched you at some point in the work.
Well, I think the Shanghai Expo Park that we have done and we have shown, besides just cleaning the water from the Wangpujiang, which is heavily polluted, we met the technical kind of requirement, but then we bring in this new life next to the community, or the future community that will build next to the Expo Park. The Shanghai government are thinking about extending this type of nature-based design all along Wangpujiang towards the city center. So we see that kind of mentality have been changed in the top level. We start to see a lot of people occupying the park in many different times, and then different programs start to nurture. And then the last thing is we are monitoring the status of the park as well, the water quality and also biodiversity. We actually see more birds. 20 different species are coming back or to occupy the park as a habitat. So we see that kind of different level type of transformation after the project has been done.
Yes. Very quickly, Mette, just one example.
One example that was on the slides that wasn't there is our Sund Naturpark in the city center of Copenhagen, where we make a detour, a pedestrian bike a bridge over the side up to the 2-story floors, and that's it's a high-end research facility on lifestyle diseases, so obesity, stress, diabetes. And we had made this design to reconnect both for visitors and neighbors, but also for researchers and users. Meet, connect, and exchange ideas in a dialogue.
Thank you, both of you. Great work, great examples. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we continue the program, I'd like all of you to welcome His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, to the symposium. Please. Thank you so much once again to Mette and Stanley. Now it's time for the final session of today. We've had 3 presentations that have been dealing with our common resources in the city. People, how can we engage people in our cities moving forward? And nature, how can we give nature a place in our cities? Now, for the final mayor's panel, it's my privilege to introduce on stage in a couple of minutes the Vice Mayor of Beijing, Mr. Sui, and the Lord Mayor of Copenhagen, Frank Jensen, in a conversation that will be moderated by Simon Hansen, who is the Global Director of Regions at C40. C40 is an organization of, I believe, 96 cities of the world, Beijing, Copenhagen, many others, who collaborate to share ideas on how to promote real climate action. The Mayor's panel, the final session, will be a discussion, short reflections on the themes, the projects, the ideas we have heard during today, but also a little insight to us about how cities like Beijing and Copenhagen can collaborate in the future promoting a sustainable development. The lessons from today, I don't know if there are any recipe. It is not the idea. We want to start a reflection, starting with resources, tradition, and materials. What does it mean for us developing our cities into the future? That our cities also have a past. The knowledge of the past, the ways people are connected in the dense communities of the past. What does that mean in developing the cities of the future? And what is the relation between keeping tradition alive and also taking care of our common resources in the sense of the materials that used to be in other products, other buildings, other connections? What does it mean when we take them into the future and use them again? People, how can we create spaces where people can play, interact, feel free to exchange ideas to improve their city, have a strong sense of community in their lives? Nature, one of the really important issues that we underlined here at the end of the symposium is how we can work with nature for the sake of the climate, but also for the sake of people. I'm sure that we can't get around these subjects in our final mayor's panel, but a few short reflections on today's presentations. I'd like to welcome on the stage Simon Hansen. A few words on what we're going to talk about now for the next 10 minutes. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. It is a real honor for me to be moderating this conversation between mayors. C40, which is the organization I represent, in C40 we believe that cities are where the future happens first. Cities are hubs of innovation and economic growth, and all over the world millions of people flock to live in cities, attracted by the opportunities and the very unique lifestyle you can find in cities. Currently, more than half of the world's population live in cities. And as we get closer to 2050, it's expected that close to 70% of the world's population would live in cities. So a very radical transformation of the way we organize human societies in just 30 years. But cities are also vulnerable to climate change. Floods, droughts, storms, this could become the order of the day if we do not find effective solutions to tackle climate change. In C40, we have developed a report which shows that in 2050, if we take a slightly pessimistic business as usual scenario, more than 800 million urban inhabitants all over the world could face increased risks of floodings. So I'm incredibly honored to invite two distinguished city leaders up to the stage. Lord Mayor Jensen of Copenhagen, Mayor Sui of Beijing, to join me for a conversation about how leading cities like Copenhagen and Beijing can turn these challenges into opportunity. How, through working with innovative design and architecture companies, with forward-looking businesses, you can create cities that are greener, more livable, and healthy for everyone. And I would like to start by asking a question to both of you that relates to some of the impressions that we've heard this morning. So to give one example, Anders Lennager explained how we can recycle materials to create buildings that are more beautiful, but also buildings which are very cost efficient. And we heard from Meng Yang how we can use tradition to redevelop and redesign our cities. So Mayor Sui, being the host of the Beijing Design Week, I'd like to start by asking you, what are the impressions that you have taken from this morning's presentations, and how can they support Beijing in creating the low-carbon economy and continuing on the path towards a sustainable and green city? Please, Mayor Sui.
首先，我代表北京市政府，还是热烈欢迎腓特烈王储，还有延伸市长以及大使。
Thank you very much, Mayor Sui, for those inspiring examples. And I think the gas tank that we are currently in is another very good example of how in Beijing you're putting into concrete action this principle of reusing and recycling things that have lost their initial purpose. Mayor Jensen, I want to address the same question to you. We heard some really inspiring presentations this morning. And Copenhagen, being a city which for decades has seen its greenhouse gas emissions going down, while in the same time frame seeing your population going up and your economic growth going up, is there still a job to do in Copenhagen? And how could these presentations from this morning potentially support you in that job?
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank all the panelists for the fantastic presentation this morning. It has been very inspiring, both for Vice Mayor Sui and myself. We can learn a lot from you, and we can do a lot as politicians and with our civil servants in the cities, but we cannot do it alone. We need you, experts, architects, engineers, and also people from the business and industry to help us to transform our cities to be more resilient, more sustainable, and more livable. And we are facing many challenges in the big cities, but the biggest challenges we are facing is the climate change. And we can see it. We can see the climate change already, both here in China, but also in Denmark, in my city, Copenhagen. As Mette shows you, the flooding Copenhagen back in July 2011 it is a concrete result of climate change, and as you heard, it cost the city more than $1 billion in damaging for the floating city. So we have to act as mayors, and we have a long tradition, as you mentioned, focusing on sustainability in Denmark. We faced the oil crisis in the 70s. We make the decision to make collective heating of all our houses. Today, 99% of all houses in Copenhagen are linked to our very efficient district heating system. Now we also have introduced district cooling, where we take the water from our harbor, take the cold out of the harbor water and distribute it in pipes beside the district heating pipes in the streets of Copenhagen. Even in the old city hall in Copenhagen, we have now both district heating and district cooling, because we also have to cool down part of the city hall in summertime. So we have a lot of solutions already. We have district heating, we have district cooling, we have bicycles, and you know, in Copenhagen, back in the 70s, also in Copenhagen, the car was king. But we could see that we could not continue making car the king in the city. So we went back to our old bicycling culture in Copenhagen. And today, after that, we have now 350 kilometers of separated bicycle lanes in the city. And the Copenhageners use them. 62% of the Copenhageners use their bike for daily transportation. And it reduces the congestion of cars in the city. Now we have more congestion on the bicycle lanes from places in Copenhagen. So the Copenhageners, they use the possibility that we make possible for them. And that's a very important message, that we can, as politicians, together with our civil servants, we can make possibilities for the citizens to behave more sustainable, more green, and the Copenhageners love it. And back in the 80s, we could see that a lot of our water in our sea and the harbors was polluted, heavily polluted. And we started investing in a new sewage system. So today the water in our harbor in Copenhagen, also in the inner harbor, is so clean that our kids can have a swim after school. And even in winter times, Copenhageners swim in our harbor. So we have a lot of concrete technologies. We can combine the technologies into city solutions, and that's what it's all about. It is sharing. Vice Mayor Sui, he was visiting us in Copenhagen in May, and we exchanged a lot of concrete urban development projects from Copenhagen, as the Vice Mayor talked about the Carlsberg Brewery and also the meat pack district in Copenhagen. And we are very inspired by each other. We are inspired in Copenhagen by the city of Beijing, and I think also the Vice Mayor is inspired by our solutions from Copenhagen.
Thank you so much, Mayor Jensen, also for giving me such an excellent segue to my next question. Because Mayor Sui, I wanted to ask you about the decision you have taken as the host of the Beijing Design Week to invite a city like Copenhagen to be a co-organizer, to have events as part of the Beijing Design Week. Clearly, you're very open to taking inspiration from other cities. What has led you to take this decision? What is it you're hoping that you could learn from a city like Copenhagen, for instance?
那个北京啊，是一个2170万人口的城市。我们这个
Thank you very much, Mayor Sui. I am aware that time is short, and we will soon be breaking also for lunch. And I still want to ask a final question, and I'll ask that to you, Mayor Jensen. I know you've been a quite frequent visitor to Beijing. This is not the first time you're in Beijing. You've been here many times. What is it that you feel a city like Copenhagen can learn from a city like Beijing? What are some of the key inspirations you take with you back to Copenhagen?
When the Vice Mayor was in Copenhagen first time in 2011, and we signed the Sister City Agreement in 2012 here in Beijing, one of the issues was that Beijing want to learn from Copenhagen to protect the clean drinking water. They have a loss of clean drinking water to the customer of 25% here in this very big mega city of Beijing with 21 million inhabitants. And we have a loss in Copenhagen with only 7%. So that's a very concrete example of how we exchange concrete solutions from one city to another. What can we learn from Beijing? 2 days ago, I have a very interesting meeting with the current mayor here in Beijing, and we were talking about the future of transport and the electric cars, electric vehicles. And it goes very, very fast here in China. We have been testing for 2 years now electric buses in Copenhagen, developed and produced here in China. And I think we can, in the future, learn a lot from China, how to make more of mobility electric. And we will do that in Copenhagen. We have already decided that all our buses in Copenhagen, 400 buses, will be electric before 2025. So there we have to learn, or we have to catch up with our friends here in Beijing and in China, how to make our mobility cleaner, greener, and that make it electric.
Thank you very much, Mayor Jensen. And I think what this conversation has shown, as short as it has been, is that the city leaderships in Beijing and Copenhagen and in many other cities around the world are ready to take up the challenge of climate change and the challenge of making cities better places to live for everyone, more green, more sustainable. I've been very impressed with the very concrete examples we've heard from both Mayor Sui and Mayor Jensen of actions that are actually taking place in cities today. So please join me in giving a hand for Lord Mayor Jensen and Mayor Sui. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you so much.
Shall we stay?
好，谢谢你。
For a photo.
Thank you to Mayors Sui and Jensen, and to you, Simon Hansen, for moderating the debate. Please stay on stage. Before we conclude the symposium, I'll ask His Royal Highness and the speakers of today to join us on stage for a short photo session. Please remain seated for just a few minutes. Of course, you're welcome to take photos also. Go. And of course, Excellency, Ministry of Culture. Sorry, yes? Yes, please join us.